Those of you that have been here for a while know that I've been preaching on occasion through the Gospel of John, just doing expository sermons as we come to these various passages. Let me just remind all of us that John's Gospel is more supplementary than the other Gospels. The other three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are the Gospels that more closely resemble each other. They're called the Synoptic Gospels because they tend to look alike. But John apparently writes last, and he does not include a lot of material that you would normally find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He did not intend to be redundant. He simply wanted to supplement the accounts of the life of Jesus, but more than that. I mean, I think John has less in mind what the overall life of Jesus was like. I mean, he tells us in his gospel, I wrote these things so that you might read them and come to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So John is not really giving us a blow-by-blow account of the life of Jesus, but more think about these specific things that I have extracted from that life and I'm putting before you so that you can see his divinity. That's essentially what the Gospel of John is about. Now, we've come to chapter 18, and what we're going to look at today begins a little bit earlier than the reading Ty had for us. We'll begin in verse 12, but in this section that we'll look at this morning, we're going to look at the first phase of Jesus' trial and the events surrounding Peter's threefold denial, at least the beginning of that denial. We'll not do the entire thing in the lesson this morning. There is an absurdity, I think, in what we are seeing at this point in the proceedings. And the absurdity is the creator of all things and the one who had no fault in him at all. The one, by virtue of his divine nature, had power over storms, power over gravity, power over disease, power over death, being led with his hand shackled. Being led by his enemies. But his hands are bound. Is that not just absurd on the face of it to think of what's actually happening here? But we come to an understanding in Scripture that these things are happening not because Jesus is impotent, but because he is willing. He's willing to be led. He's willing to subject his infinite power to the ridiculous trappings of human power. Whether these are chains or leather thongs, I don't know. But this somewhat comical mob that we've already read when Jesus said, I'm Jesus whom you're seeking, fell all over themselves. It's like Barney Fife going to arrest Jesus. And yet Jesus submits himself. I'll even let you people, you incompetent apprehenders, I'll let you put chains or thongs on me, and I'll let you lead me because this is the Father's will. We were just singing in the last song about how magnificent God is. And of course, Jesus sharing in that same nature. Beautiful beyond description. Majesty enthroned above. And yet, as a common criminal, he's being led by these weaklings, these men of no account. In John 18 and verse 12, then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Things are moving at a fast pace now. Things have slowly and gradually been unfolding. We've seen Jesus numerous times before this say, my time has not yet come. But there's a point at which he says, now the hour has come. Father, glorify me. Give me the glory that I had with you before the world was. And so Jesus had been with the disciples observing the Passover. Judas goes out to betray him. Jesus gives them various words of encouragement, John 14, 15, 16, the prayer in 17. They then head out into the night across the Kidron Valley and up the side of the Mount of Olives to the Garden of Gethsemane. And we noted in a previous sermon that I did, and I had a map up of what Jerusalem looks like from the Mount of Olives, and it's clear that Jesus could see these people coming. It's night. They've got torches and lanterns. They've got their weapons. And you can look across the Kidron Valley and see the gate they would have come out at the temple area, crossed over the Kidron, and he could have run, could have fled. He knew what was coming. He had already said to Judas, what you do quickly. But Jesus submits himself to this charade of arrest, and especially the charade of the trial that will soon unfold. And so Jesus is not only bound, arrested here, this is after he heals Malchus, whose ear Peter had cut off. And insofar as they could see with lantern light, they had witnessed this miracle right in front of them. A man's ear laying on the ground. And Jesus, with no effort, no sewing, no anesthesia, he just simply puts the ear back on. And also Jesus had secured the release of his apostles. Who are you seeking? Jesus of Nazareth. That's me. Let these people go. They're not listed in the arrest indictment. Let them go. Matthew says in his account, in Matthew 26:56, all the disciples forsook him and fled, as he said they would. Luke notes, and Peter followed at a distance, Luke 22:54. And now here John himself says, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, verse 15. So you have to take all of the gospel accounts and put them together to really see what's going on here. You know, Peter had just made his statement not long before this, I'm willing to go with you to death. I'll fight for you to the death. Well, at this point, Peter is carrying out his word. All the disciples flee. It's high emotion. It's a crisis moment. Everybody scatters into the night, and Peter follows at a distance. Can't you picture this? Hiding behind olive trees, hoping he won't be seen, hiding behind a rock, watching the arrest detail lead Jesus away as a common criminal. But Peter is there. John is somewhere there. He refers to himself here in the third person. But it is John, when they get inside Jerusalem and go to the palace of the high priest, where this preliminary hearing, we'll call it, when this happens, and John is able to gain entrance into the palace because of his connections to the high priest, which are not explained in any detail in the Gospels. It's just that he's acquainted with the high priest or the family of the high priest or had connections in that regard. And so Peter not only follows at a distance, he and John are able to get into the very courtyard of the palace. And you have to kind of picture in your mind, you've probably seen in some Bible Atlas books maybe, that many of these palaces and large homes would be sort of in a square, but around an inner courtyard in the middle. And so the living areas or the official areas would be in the perimeter, but in the middle, inside the gate that got you into the house, and inside the middle of all of that is a courtyard where Peter found himself. We're told in verses 12 through 14 that he is first led to Annas. Now, in our studies of the Gospels in different times and different sermons, I may have preached on this or others may have, we probably understand what's happening here. Annas is the father-in-law of Caiaphas, as is explained here. Annas is the one that is the rightful high priest. Caiaphas has been appointed high priest by the Roman officials for their political reasons. So we already have sort of a sham of high priesthood going on here. The high priesthood is not according to the law of God and according to the descent from Aaron, but it's more a matter of protocol. It's more a matter of politics. But yet you see where Jesus is taken first. And it's not to the acting high priest, it's to Annas, his father-in-law, the one that the Jews would have recognized truly as being the holder of the office. So Annas still has great influence. He's the de facto high priest, even though Caiaphas holds the position. And in John's account, the focus is not going to be on Caiaphas and that part of the trial. It's really going to be on Annas. Again, I would presume because the other ones concentrate more on what happens before Caiaphas. But we are reminded here in verse 14 that it's Caiaphas who gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die for the people rather than all the people die. That's a reference to what John said back in John 11 and verse 50. So Caiaphas was really the, if you will, the point of the spear that brought all of this opposition to Jesus to a head. It may be unjust and may not be the best thing to do, and it may be dangerous for us to try to actually put him to death since he's so popular, but it would be better for us to pursue this course than the whole nation be destroyed by the Romans. You know, when we talked about that, when I preached through John 11, what we said was that's a false dichotomy. There's one principle I could get all of us to remember in the moment of debate or crisis is to remember that. Your opponent will put you in the position of a false dichotomy, a false choice. Well, is it A or is it B? And they want you to only think about A and B. And this is when we need to step back and say, maybe there's a C. Maybe there's a D. Maybe the truth is not in the dilemma that I'm being put in. Maybe the truth lies elsewhere. That's what Caiaphas had done. Well, which is better, for one man to die or the nation to die? False dichotomy. How about Jesus lives and the nation doesn't be destroyed by the Romans? How about that? How about we put our trust in Jesus? How about we depend on His power? If He is the Messiah, how about we lean on the power of God and then we don't worry about the Romans? That was answer C that nobody was thinking about. So John points out who Caiaphas is, but he's really focusing on Jesus before Annas. And we'll come back to that because he steps away from that scene and he brings Peter into the picture. In verse 15, as Ty read for us earlier, I'll not read through that again, but Peter himself is now going to be put on trial. And it's a trial of his own words. I will never forsake you. I will never abandon you. I don't care if I have to die. That's what he had said during the Passover meal. Well, those words are going to be put to the test. So again, John's connections gain himself and Peter entrance into the palace. And it's through John speaking to the girl at the gate. Oh, he's with me. I'm acquainted with him. Please let him in. And as Peter is entering, the servant girl in verse 17 who kept the door said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples, are you? Now, why did she ask that? I don't know. Maybe because she knew John was. If she knew John was known to the family of the high priest. And maybe she was just assuming that Peter knowing John apparently being a disciple of the Lord, probably Peter was. But it's interesting to me how she frames the question. She framed it in such a way as to make it easy for Peter to deny that he was a follower. You're not one of them, are you? Oh, no. That's another hint, when we get put on the spot, we're in a crisis moment, we're in the middle of some kind of I don't mean argument vehemently, I mean a discussion about spiritual things. It may be that we're asked a leading question. And it's just easy to let that question take you where the questioner wants you to go. I don't know if it would have made any difference whatsoever. I'm not putting words in Peter's mouth. I'm not trying to let him off the hook. But if the question had been, are you a disciple of Jesus? Maybe he would have answered differently. I don't know, probably not. The Lord said he was going to deny him. All I'm saying is the question phrased negatively makes it easier for Peter to just fall into it. You're not one of his disciples, are you? Oh, no. Just look, it's more important for me to be near Jesus, to be here to help him if I can, than to tell the truth in this moment. I don't know what went through Peter's mind. But what we have is the first of 3 denials. No, I'm not a disciple. It says in verse 18, the servants and the officers had made a fire of coals and stood there, for it was cold. So we know by the calendar, we know this is the Passover. We know even as celebrated today, that's in the spring, late March, early April by our calendar reckoning. We also know that Jerusalem's about 2,500 feet above sea level. So it's chilly. Appropriate that it's physically chilly because it's really chilly spiritually. The shivers should run down our spine reading this account of what is going on. But at this point, Peter's being put to the test, and he's already failed. Verse 19, the high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. It's been noted before by those that know Jewish law better than I do, that one of the first irregularities in all of this is witnesses in Jesus' defense should have been called first. And yet, that's not what happens. In fact, there are no witnesses to Jesus' defense. It says in verse 19, the high priest asked him about his disciples and his doctrine. What is that but asking a man to incriminate himself before this body of men that were supposedly gathered together to find out the truth of the matter? If he's arrested and being put on trial, they ought to already know the answer to that question. Why are you asking Jesus? And in fact, that's what Jesus says. But this is sort of a microcosm of something greater going on. And what that is there's nothing about this charade that is remotely impartial. This is not a fact-finding gathering. We call it sort of a preliminary hearing in our terminology, in our legal terminology. The formal trial will happen before Caiaphas and will happen at the reconvening of the Sanhedrin Council after daylight. This is just preliminary to what will be the official hearing, the official trial coming in the next few hours. But what's really going on here is that the conviction has been predetermined. And what we have is a conviction in search of a plausible judicial framework. They already intend to put him to death. They just need to formalize it by this kangaroo court, by this illegal assembly coming together as they have done. Not even all the Sanhedrin is there. Again, things are moving very quickly. They didn't know if they were going to bring Jesus in or not. You know, they've tried this before. And the guards sent out to arrest Jesus came back empty-handed. And they said, "Where is he? Why didn't you bring him?" You remember their answer? "No man ever spake like this man. We've never heard anything like this before." They literally could not lay hands on him. And so these Jewish leaders, they didn't know if this is going to work or not. They're working under, obviously, the cover of darkness, working alongside of Judas the traitor. But they don't know what's going to happen. They're totally unprepared for Jesus to actually be brought in. No proper legal procedure is unfolding here. And so Jesus is asked about his disciples and his doctrine. Well, he's not going to incriminate his disciples. He already secured their release in the garden. As to his doctrine, what does Jesus say? "I spoke openly to the world." I'm not one of these false messiahs running around, hiding in the shadows, trying to raise an army and fight, for the cause of the Jewish people. I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple. That's one of the things Jesus was resented for, was trespassing on the territory of the Sadducees and teaching resurrection, among other things, on their turf. And now they're asking Jesus, "What is your doctrine?" Seriously? You've arrested the man. You don't know what he teaches? Then why did you arrest him? This is a total joke. But it's a joke that works. From the standpoint of mankind, it worked. And we'll see that all the way through the trial before Pilate. So Jesus says, in essence, your question is nonsensical. I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and the temple where the Jews always meet. In secret, I've said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. Where are your witnesses? You're asking me to testify against myself. Where are your witnesses? Where are the people that heard me teach things that you disagree with? Obviously, they're not there. Because this is not a show of fairness or justice being put on here. The conclusion is already decided. In verse 22, when Jesus answers as he does, with no sense whatsoever, and we're told in 1 Peter chapter 2 that Jesus did not answer with any sort of reproach, but answering calmly and directly and correctly as he did, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" Well, I told you about false dichotomies. Jesus puts a true dichotomy before this officer in verse 23. If I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. That's one option. If I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. You've stricken me without cause. I am simply accused of a crime. You should not have struck me. But if I have spoken well, why do you strike me? In other words, what Jesus is saying is, your reaction to me is highly inappropriate. You had two choices of what to do better than what you did. And of course, there's absolutely no remonstrance being offered toward this guard, this one standing by who strikes Jesus. Apparently, we all get braver when we're standing with people that agree with us. Peter is outside going through the opposite. This man's inside, and he's surrounded by friends, supporters. He figures, I can strike this man that's on trial and get away with it, which he does, in man's sight anyway. What's going on outside? Verse 25, now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, you are not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I'm not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter then denied again, and immediately the rooster crowed, as Jesus said it would. A couple of things here, and you don't gather it really from just reading John, but when you put all the Gospels together, this doesn't all happen at one time. It's spaced. So what that means is the pressure is mounting on Peter, and he feels it. He's already lied once for whatever his rationale would have been. Stay close to the Lord, whatever. I need to find out what's happening. I want to defend him if I can. Whatever he's thinking. He tells a lie to support that. But that was a servant girl he first answered to, not really threatening. But now the pressure gets turned up. Those that are standing around the fire, we learned earlier, were the soldiers and servants of the household. So there's more of them, and men that just successfully brought Jesus in under arrest. Peter has a second chance to right the wrong that he just committed. But again, the question's framed negatively. You're not one of his disciples, are you? I mean, you could probably imagine the inflection that was used in that question. Peter's identified even as one who speaks like a Galilean. You sure sound like you might be one of his disciples. And then thirdly, the pressure really gets turned up when one of Malchus's relatives, cousin, whoever, it's not specified. He had been in the garden when Peter cut Malchus's ear off. Did I not see you in the garden with him? This is more than, are you one of his disciples? Weren't you out there on the Mount of Olives? Didn't I see you? Now remember, they had torches, and torches flicker, and it's otherwise very dark, and you might not see a face straight on and clear. But this man is very suspicious. I think I've seen you before. I think you were out there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I think it's you. Can you imagine what's going on in Peter's mind now? I said a minute ago, things are moving fast. You know, people in high-level sports talk about when they get in a very high-stress moment in the game or the match or whatever it is, it's like your brain is moving at 1,000 miles an hour. You're not thinking straight. You're not making the same decisions you would make in practice, say. This is another way in which Satan takes advantage of us. We get under pressure, we get in a crisis, things are moving so quickly, we don't have time to think, we don't have time to pray about it, we're just thrust in the middle of something. So often in that situation we do the wrong thing because we're impulsive, we're reacting. We're not thinking our way through. We're not taking a moment, step back, let me take a breath, let me think about what's happening here. Nope, we're put under that pressure and we're afraid. The third denial, as it came out of his mouth, was immediately highlighted by the crowing of a rooster. If you can perhaps imagine when Jesus originally gave this prophecy just a few hours before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. Seems to me both of those kind of are illogical going together. First of all, why in the world would Peter deny him 3 times, one of his strongest champions and strongest disciples? And then, where's that chicken coming from? They're in the courtyard of the high priest. There's a chicken? Just, you know, you can imagine, there's so many things that Jesus said, the apostles went, what does he mean by that? You know what he means by that? No, I don't know what he means by that. And sometimes it says they were afraid to ask. He's going to think we're really stupid if we ask what he means by that. And sometimes they did go and say, what did you mean by that parable? We didn't get it. And sometimes he would upbraid them. Are you kind of slow on the uptake too? And as Peter denies him the 3rd time, the rooster crowed, wherever that rooster was, whatever he was doing in town, I guess maybe people had their own pet chickens. Maybe the high priest, he missed the rural life, had his chickens with him. The rooster crows. And that's another thing that happens to us sometimes. We get into a certain mindset, and things are happening quickly, and we just stumble forward, and we're not really taking in what all's happening until we sin, and Satan drops the curtain. And we go, I can't believe I did that. I didn't see that coming. And that rooster crowing, the rooster may as well have said, guilty, because that's really what the crowing meant. It was the upholding of Jesus' prophecy. The second crowing of that rooster marked the third denial of Peter. And of course, again, John, doesn't embellish the story. We know that Peter is mortified. Worse than all, it says the Lord turned and looked at Peter. I believe it's Luke, but I'm not sure. You can double check me on that later. But it says the Lord turned and looked at Peter. I mean, drive a stake in the heart, will you? The Lord turned and looked at Peter. They had eye contact. I don't know what was the look on the Lord's face. Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. And I don't think it would have been on Jesus' part, I told you so, but it may have been more like, I told you so. I told you so. But you didn't listen. So that leads me to some closing observations that we might be able to draw out of these episodes. Number one, God knows us better than we know ourselves. Now just think about that a minute. Who knows you better than yourself? Well, God does. Jesus told Peter what he would do, and Peter denied it. After everything he had learned by being in the presence of Jesus, he had never seen Jesus wrong one time. Not once. And Jesus says to Peter, before the rooster crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. And Peter said, no, that ain't going to happen. No way that's going to happen. But you know what we do? We make excuses for ourselves. We overestimate our strength. Our conviction is probably not as strong as we think it is. Our reactions in a time of crisis are often the wrong reactions. When God is warning us in His Word to avoid certain situations, to behave a certain way in certain situations, or don't do certain things in certain situations, our answer should not be, I'd never do that. I mean, the longer we live and the more we fail, should we not be more realistic about our limitations? That leads us to the second observation, that is, we do not always perceive the danger we put ourselves in. As we say in the South, bless Peter's heart. He wanted to follow the Lord, to be a support and encouragement. He had, I'm sure, all the right motives in wanting to follow Jesus. He just didn't see what position he was putting himself in. Sometimes we can end up in the wrong situation for the right reason, but we're not ready for it. We're not ready to handle it. And there's sometimes in life, I'm not saying this is necessarily true of Peter. I think he did what he thought was the right thing to do in following along. Sometimes we just need to say no. That's a situation that's going to push me beyond my limits. I know it. I see it. In this case, Peter didn't even see it. But sometimes, again, we overestimate our abilities and say, no, I can handle it. You know, my friend asked me to go to the club on Friday night. It's probably not the nicest place I need to be, but you know what? I can handle it. Whatever it may be, we put ourselves in situations, we watch movies, we go to concerts. We go to parties that we've been invited to. I don't know what the specific circumstance may be. You fill in the blank. Ask yourself that question. When is the last time I crashed and burned because I didn't perceive the danger I put myself in? Sometimes danger finds us regardless. But sometimes we walk flat right into it because we're not taking our human frailties seriously. Third thing I would draw out of this, and it really comes from the guard who struck Jesus, is we must be careful not to condemn others when they are right. Really, we can throw Annas and Caiaphas and the whole bunch into that category, but specifically, Jesus upbraids the guard for striking him. They're all condemning Jesus, and the guard condemned Jesus with his words. You speak to the high priest like that? Sounds like the high priest was used to getting his way. But we must be careful in our zeal to point out error, which there's nothing wrong with that zeal if it's handled correctly. But in our zeal to point out error, we must be careful. Number one, we're not acting self-righteously and making ourselves the standard for everybody else. But beyond that, that's really not the point here. It's the fact that somebody else may be right, and I put myself in a position of condemning them. I mean, I'm not speaking foreign language, am I? Haven't you ever had that situation happen to you when you thought somebody else handled a situation the wrong way, or they were to be blamed for something, only later to find out there was a fact of the matter that you didn't realize, there was a slant or an angle you weren't aware of, you passed judgment, and then later you go, uh-oh, I didn't know that. That changes the whole way I look at that person, because I judge them unfairly or prematurely or unjustly. This man did the unthinkable. He struck the Son of God. Probably not what you want to do. But he felt so justified in it, didn't he? He thought he was defending the high priest. Just like Peter thought he was defending the Lord by cutting off the ear of Malchus when the Lord didn't need that kind of help. I have 12 legions of angels I can call on. Peter, I don't need your sword. Not to mention this is the will of God anyway. So we must be careful, as Jesus said, to judge with righteous judgment. To not be so quick on the trigger to blame someone or assign guilt or fault when maybe we've not thought it through or maybe we don't have all the facts. But we impulsively do things, and impulse struck the Son of God on the face. That man was lucky he had another day to live, which is only attributable to the grace of the Lord whom he struck. And then finally, we must strive to maintain our composure even in the face of insult, injustice, and injury. What restraint Jesus demonstrated when slapped across the face. Of course, it's going to get worse than this. But in this moment, Jesus is slapped across the face, and he has the power to vaporize that person. But he doesn't. And here's the point. We look at Jesus' action and we admire it. We say, that is so commendable. To have that kind of restraint, to have that kind of possession of yourself, to have that kind of circumspection is, and we admire that. We treasure that, but do we emulate it? Do we have that kind of self-control that even if slapped across the face unjustly, we could hold ourselves in and point out the wrongness that was just done? It's one thing to admire, as we've talked about in our class this morning. It's one thing to say, I love you, but then how do you act? It's one thing to say, I admire something that Jesus demonstrates, but do I do it? how easy it is to watch somebody else do something and admire it, how difficult it is to then say, that's going to be me. I'm going to model myself after that example. And to close, let me just say this, as we're talking about this breaking into the middle of all this trial and all going on here. I've made this point before in preaching lessons that I've done on the trial and the cross, but I'll repeat it here. We usually refer in terms at this point, at this juncture in Jesus' life, as Jesus being on trial. And he was, although there was a predetermined outcome. This was God's plan. This was God's purpose that Jesus die as a sacrifice for sin. But here's what I really want us to see. It really wasn't Jesus that was on trial. It was everybody else. Annas was on trial. Caiaphas was on trial. Pontius Pilate was on trial. Peter was on trial. All the disciples were on trial. How many of them passed the test? None of them. So it may be if you're here this morning, you're on trial. What may be on trial is, what do you think about Jesus? What do you believe about him? Have you examined the evidence? Have you looked deeply into that question? And if you have, what's the answer that you would give? And then, does that demonstrate the way that you're living? See, Jesus really wasn't on trial. Everything that was happening was ordained of God. And the trial that he was undergoing, he was going to pass with flying colors. So what about us? Are we as strong as we think we are? A la Peter. How do we handle the moment of crisis? Are we ready for it? Satan isn't going to be polite enough and gracious enough to let you be prepared for whatever may come in life. Oh, one of his biggest tricks is to catch you off guard. But that's where we need to, every single day, be living with faith and deliberation, with purpose, with clarity, because he's going to catch us when we're least expecting it. And if we just sort of merrily tootle along through life thinking that I'm strong enough to handle whatever may come, if any man thinks he stand, take heed lest he fall. So where are you this morning in your conviction about Jesus Christ? Maybe life has asked you several times that question in one way or the other. Have you answered it? Have you answered it properly? Is it a matter that you think about? There is no other deeper question than that. What do we think about the Son of God? And how do we answer that? And then how's that affecting our life? And how does it affect our view of life here on earth? How does it affect our view of eternity? I'm going to sing a song of encouragement. If there's somebody here that would like to, in their self-reflection, obey the gospel of Christ and devote your life, commit your life, even as we talked in our class about committing ourselves to a mate, to a husband or a wife, so our relationship with Christ is a commitment as well. And if you're ready to make that commitment this morning, all things are ready to assist you in coming to Christ and submitting yourself to his will, to believe that he's the Son of God, to repent of your sins, to be baptized into Christ, thus establishing that relationship, declaring for Christ what Peter was not willing to do himself, to not say, I don't know the man, but to say, yes, I do know him, and I'm living for him each and every day. If that's your desire this morning, or we can help you in any other way, would you come while we stand and sing?